There's a moment that happens at least once in every sports fan's life. The final seconds of a game. The crowd is on its feet. Someone scores or doesn't score or does something that apparently means everything, and the room erupts. People are crying, grown adults sobbing, hugging strangers, and somewhere in that room there is at least one person standing very still, holding their drink, smiling politely, thinking, I don't get it. I really genuinely do not get it. If that's you, you've probably wondered at some point whether something is slightly wrong with you, whether you're missing a chip that everyone else seems to have, whether the sports gene just skipped you somehow. But here's what's actually going on, and it's more interesting than you might think. Let's start with the thing that makes sports powerful in the first place, because it's not really about the game. It never was. When a fan watches their team play, something neurologically remarkable happens. Their brain doesn't fully register the separation between themselves and the players on the field. Studies using MRI scans have found that fans watching sports activate the same motor regions as if they themselves were performing the physical actions. Your brain, on some level, is playing. Your nervous system is in it. The stress response is real. The cortisol spike when your team is losing, real. The dopamine flood when they win, absolutely real. And there's something else layered underneath all of that. Something older. Humans are tribal animals. We have been for 200,000 years. For most of that time, knowing which group you belong to was a survival question. Your tribe meant food, protection, cooperation, meaning. The part of your brain that lights up when your team wins isn't in the rational prefrontal cortex. It's in older, deeper structures. The same ones that once tracked who was friend and who was threat. Sports gives the tribal brain a legal, socially acceptable outlet. A yeast way to feel the ancient electricity of group belonging without anyone actually getting hurt. So when fans say sports makes them feel something, they're not being dramatic. They are, in the most literal neurological sense, feeling something. Something real and old and deeply wired. But here's where it gets interesting. Because if the tribal brain is universal, why doesn't everyone respond to sports this way? The answer has a few layers, and none of them are about being broken. The first layer is early exposure. The brain is not a fixed thing. It's a prediction machine that builds models of what matters based on what it repeatedly experiences. And the window for forming deep emotional associations with things, sports, music, certain foods, certain aesthetics, is widest when we're young. If you grew up in a home where Sunday meant football, where your dad's mood shifted with a scoreline, where you watched games as a family ritual, your brain learned to attach significance to sports. Before you were ever old enough to consciously choose that, the sport became a carrier of something much bigger: belonging, safety, the feeling of being home. If that didn't happen for you, your brain simply built its models elsewhere, around books or music or art or something else that carried that same weight in your world. This isn't a deficiency, it's just where your emotional architecture was built. The second layer is identity investment. Sports fandom runs deepest when someone's identity is genuinely tied to the team. Researchers call this burgeoning, basking in reflected glory, and its opposite, corfing, cutting off reflected failure. Fans unconsciously use team performance to regulate their own sense of self-worth. When the team wins, they feel competent, capable, part of something that succeeded. When the team loses, the threat to the ego is real enough that people distance themselves from the outcome. Suddenly it's they lost, not we lost. For someone who never made that identity investment, none of this machinery activates. The scoreline is just numbers. The players are just strangers, and there's no emotional stake, so there's no emotional experience. It's not coldness, it's not superiority or indifference. It's simply that the wiring was never connected. The third layer is something a little more personal, and honestly, this one surprised me when I first came across it. Some people don't connect with sports not because they lack the capacity for tribal feeling, but because they already have it somewhere else. Fandom itself is not uniquely a sports thing. The person who never understood why someone would cry over a championship game might have cried when a fictional character died. They might feel a visceral sense of loss when a band breaks up, or a skin-tingling recognition when they meet someone who loves the same obscure novel. The tribal brain is still running. The attachment system is still online. It's just pointed somewhere different, which means the real divide isn't between emotional people and unemotional people. It's between different categories of meaning, different things that the brain has been taught through exposure and experience and repetition to treat as significant. There's also, if we're being honest, a class and cultural dimension here that rarely gets acknowledged. Sports fandom is often inherited socially. In many communities, it's one of the few widely accepted spaces where men especially are allowed to be visibly emotional. Crying at a game is okay in a way that crying at a movie might not be in certain social contexts. For people who were already given other acceptable emotional outlets or who simply moved in different social worlds, sports never had to serve that function. And without that function, without sports as an emotional permission slip, it just doesn't land. None of this makes sports fans irrational, and none of it makes non-fans cold or detached. What it means is that human beings are extraordinarily good at forming deep meaning around arbitrary anchors, a team's colors, a fictional universe, a musical genre, a subculture, and that the specific anchor matters far less than the emotional infrastructure built around it. The sports fan and the person who has never watched a game in their life might actually have more in common than either realizes. Both are running the same ancient software. Both are looking for the same things: belonging, shared identity, collective joy, something to care about together. They've just installed their version of it in completely different places. So if you're someone who has spent years feeling slightly alien in a sports-saturated world, wondering why you can't just care, wondering if you're somehow missing the point of being a person, you're not. Your brain built its home somewhere else. And that home is just as real, just as human, just as wired with all the love and loyalty and loss that sports has ever made anyone feel. The question isn't why some people don't get sports. The question is what you love with that same intensity. Because if you look closely, I think you'll find you love something that way. Most people do. They just don't always recognize it for what it is. Drop it in the comments. The thing you love the way other people love their team. I'm genuinely curious. And I think you might be surprised by who else is out there, quietly loving the same strange, specific thing as you.